and everybody on the panel.
Hello and welcome. This panel about managing the money, who gets what, and essentially it's about the economic makeup of touring a show and everything that goes into what would be the whole overall, let's call it a pie. So if we talk about the pie and what goes around, all the different parts and other financial constraints to it that we can make up, and how can we make it manageable but sustainable. I'll introduce the panel and let them go across, starting with Tash. Either one.
Hello, I'm Tash. I'm an independent music manager. I work with Squid, Mandy and Deanna, Jerk Cub, Adult Jazz, Bingo Fury. I'm also the co-creator of Sweaty Ceilings, a new book celebrating London's independent music venues, and the money from the book will go to the Mgmt.
Hi, I'm Amelie, and I'm the managing director at Village Underground, and I'm also involved in the management of Earth. I started as an intern at Village Underground 14 years ago, so I have seen it all. And I'm quite familiar with that pie, I guess. Village Underground, for those who don't know, is a venue in East London that has a 700 capacity, and Earth is also East London, a bit more north, and has 3 rooms ranging from 300 cap to 1,200. Yeah, that's it.
Hello, I'm Andy Jones. I'm one of the co-founders and the music programmer for Focus Wales. We're a showcase festival that happens in Wrexham each May. We also promote 3 other festivals now in Wales, and we're also the export office for new music from Wales. So we're presenting showcases at industry events around the world like Reeperbahn, Eurosonic, South by Southwest, and many more.
Hello, I'm Rhoda, Dakar. I am an artist. I'm just looking, check what I am. I'm an artist on this side, and on this side I'm an MVT patron and trustee, because I've been around for longer than most of you, I think, by the looks of it. Has anyone got an old person's zip card? Can you go on the tube for free? Oh, well, then me and you, we're in the same boat. The rest of you. But yeah, I've been in the music business for a very long time. I did my very first live performance in 1969 as a child, I will admit, but I did start I was in front of an audience in the 60s. So I've been doing it a long time. I know what I'm doing, mostly. I'm a bit gobby, I apologise in advance, but, you know, I'm here to represent the artists in a minority. Here you go, mate.
Thanks, Rhoda. I'm Tom Gray. I am a songwriter and composer, mostly. Well, I was. I was an artist, a performing artist in a band called Gomez, won a Mercury Prize when I was still in nappies. I am the chair of the Ivors Academy, which is the British Association. Yeah, you probably gigged with me then, Rhoda. And I'm the chair of the British Association of Songwriters, Composers and Authors. I also sit on NPRS, fighting the good fight in there, and I'm the director of UK Music. There we are.
And I'm Nathan Clark. I run the Brudenell in Leeds. I also sit on the executive board of Live, the West Yorkshire Combined Authority Culture Committee, and a board member of Come Play With Me in Leeds. So as you can see, what we've got here is a real makeup of that pie. I think the only kind of construct that is missing in this is an agent, essentially, that isn't here within it. So we've got an artist, a manager, venues represented, a festival and promoter represented. So we've got kind of, what I would like to see here is a genuine, honest debate where we can get into something and have some positive kind of construction, but some realistic views that can kind of conflict and understand why, essentially, the pie, as we might call it, needs to grow or needs to be more fairly eaten by each of us and divided up. So, firstly, can there be any further increases to the pie? And I think if we're looking at that, and we'll start at a grassroots level where, you know, new talent development is, how can we look and will there be any objective to growing the pie, or will we limit that? Would you like to start as a venue, Amelie?
First of all, this pie analogy is making me really hungry. I should say that. You might hear my stomach rumbling because I was hungry to start with. I can't believe you're starting with this question because it's pretty hard, given what we know. I would say, in terms of our venue pie, looking at just that one, or like our slice of the pie, we have tried to make it bigger. We have, live shows, the higher fees and the bar revenues we get from that, it's not enough. We added club shows to that, still not enough. Corporate events, not enough. Now we're looking at we have added restoration levy to the mix, it's still not enough. Ticketing deals it's still not enough. And also one thing that we don't have enough of is time or expertise, for example, to seek sponsorship or funding. And yeah, like I am stuck because in real life I'm stuck. We could, I know, extending the amount of funding is an unrealistic ask at the moment, but we do need it. And so I guess at least making it easier to access so that we know we're all very busy and we don't have much resources, that would help, for example. Or I was thinking just now, the MVT has so much expertise on board, like with all the gurus. Is there a guru that could help us with seeking sponsorship deal and helping us with that? That could be one way to.
I mean, I think what you're speaking about, and certainly at Venues Day, resonates with everyone in the room, right? Or with a lot of the people that come from venues. So do you find that, and sometimes I'm going to have to put my devil's advocate hat on and say, do you find those pressures are coming from the shows themselves or from external pressures such as rateable value, utilities, and other kind of overheads and rent that are not intrinsically linked to the show? Or is it coming from raising costs of the artists and other kind of touring costs? Or is it all compounded at once? Where is the mix of that kind of pie and how it's shrinking at the end result of what yours is? Where does it come from as a venue?
The model used to work, the one I described, with that restoration levy before COVID at Village Underground. And after COVID, what we've seen is what everyone is facing, I guess, rising costs of utilities, and salaries to try to not match inflation, but to get close to that. And then on the other side, lower bar takes and lower attendance, which also leads to lower bar takes. I did a quick calculation, and before COVID, we would sell per person on average at Village Underground 1.4 drinks, and now it's 1.1 drink. And the attendance has gone down on average from 550 to 480, for example. I think that's what the biggest impact is.
So on from that, do you feel that the artists, managers, agents, and everyone else, promoters concerned with that, see those metrics that have reduced and the cost of living pressures and the overheads that are coming with it, are they taken in as a consideration when shows are coming in and live music coming into the venue? Do you feel that's a dialogue that's ever happened?
We only really deal with promoters, sometimes with agents, but not really with any other parties involved in the making of a show. And we're going to increase the higher fees soon, but it took us 7 years, I think, to do it. It's slightly terrifying to do it because that means we'll get less shows, and the high fees, the increase we're going to go for, isn't even going to cover the increase in overheads or this lack of revenue on the bar. And so I think there is a bit of a lack of dialogue and understanding. But it's not just, I'm not just complaining about lack of understanding about how a venue works and the struggles we face. I mean, I'm really happy that we get to sit here together and to hear from all these perspectives. And I think one thing I was thinking of preparing for this is this should be happening more often. We're on the phones to promote on the phone to promoters. We discuss a lot of things with them, but we never really get to talk to artist management directly or to agents or even, I don't know, labels. Why not? Because, you know, like sometimes we're impacted by what happens at labels when gigs cancel last minute because the album isn't ready, things like that.
So, to a kind of promoter festival side, if we take it to you, Andy, do you feel that there's ability to put further increases in? And if so, where? Or do you think we've kind of got to the point where the audience and others are willing to pay that? Or do you think there's any growth an option to be able to do that?
Oh, that's an easy question, eh? Look, I mean, in terms of like progressing things more broadly, like I'm really concerned about where the new promoters are coming from, because I often do like mentorship with young people who are interested in it, and you know, when you break down the costs for young people coming into it, and you go, well, these are the cost of venue, we're going to have to charge you, and it includes engineer and the hire and PA and lights and all of that, and this is, you know, let's look at this artist and it'll be this ticket and this is going to be a break-even point. They're just like, well, why would I want to do that? It's like, and as we all know, because it's like, it's so hard to make it work now, and the costs are what they are. I feel like it's been squeezed so much. I really think like it's time for a regulator.
Who do you feel is squeezing you?
Well, the flow of money's broken, isn't it? I mean, you know, the recorded industry. Let's have a chat about that and where all that money is, you know, and how that doesn't flow to the artists in the way that it should. And as a result, how agents and promoters are often like this, especially when it comes to event and festival fees.
So, bringing that in, that's something we were going to bring in a little bit later, but I'm going to pitch something that's happened more in recent years, and certainly just pre-COVID and on from that. Do you feel the labels are now impacting more on the live side, and certainly with promoters, with the outstore kind of culture that has happened with new releases that is now happening in venues, and do venues see the value that comes back to them at the same time, and how do artists who are working on those outsources, do you feel how that is impacting on your ability to take risks within it, or do you have that in a sense?
Well, I don't think I mean, we don't incur sort of negative impact on that score because we've got sensible exclusivities built in. I know exclusivities can be problematic, but it's an important topic that we probably should pick up on as well at some point in terms of, you know, everyone getting a fair share of things. But I feel like the dynamic, you know, the relationship that we have with agents is pretty healthy, and we're always getting a heads up on ambitions to do outstore runs and things like that. So it's not impacted us yet, but I imagine a few promoters have fallen victim to that, where they're putting on a show and suddenly they're doing a free takeover at HMV, 200 yards down the road from the venue. Perhaps you've got experiences of this. I don't know if anyone else has. But.
I'd love to ask Tash on that as a manager. What's your experience between it, and is that impacting venues and promoters, and how, from a manager's side, you see that kind of relationship, and especially from you also as a manager, how do you feel that there is an ability for you personally to see how we can grow that pie, or how does the money flow come to you, or has it been constrained in that?
On outstore specifically, there's always been a bit of a power struggle between labels and promoters on that particular issue. It's hard because, I mean, I think it really depends on whether the artist in question is going for a chart position. But I think there is a lack of understanding on the label side for how the live industry operates. But I think that's like more to your point, that there's just like a real lack of communication across the different sections of the live industry. Like, I think it would be really useful for managers to know how venues are struggling, and how we can actually like work together to come up with a solution that helps everyone, whether that's a brand partnership for both artists and venues. But it's there something is definitely broken. Like, I'm currently just like budgeting up a tour for next year, and it's I think it's like a 20-date tour, and it's coming in at about a 30 grand loss. And like, as like an artist is not in a position whether they can sustain that loss. That it's like, and the only way to bring the loss down is to reduce the length of the tour to sort of 7-9 dates, which is exactly the sort of problem that...
And that's exactly the kind of follows the pattern and the data that Mark talked about at the start in what they're finding from their annual surveys, right? Where you're finding artists are playing less territories, certain A markets or B markets, and cutting out on that. So how do we stimulate new territories by getting the finance to go out and do that? How are we going to do that if, exactly going back to Andy's point, when a new promoter in those territories are looking at the risk to reward factor and seeing that it's massively overburdened in the risk side? So how, as an ecosphere and that pie, can we get someone to actually come and deliver it? I'd love to hear an artist side on the risk that's currently on tour, and then Tom's side as an artist and someone coming from several kind of areas within it, and recorded side that can kind of give us an overall picture of this. Firstly, kind of, is there any ability to push the size of the pie? Is there any further increases that we can have?
Right, me?
Yeah.
Okay, me. So I've just got an album out, and as you pointed out, so I'm doing like a 9-10 date tour or whatever, which is half what you really want to be doing. So what you kind of have to end up doing is doing in stores, not even out stores, but like in stores. But because I understand better how the industry works, I don't do in stores in or near towns where I'm doing gigs, because that's just dumb, isn't it? That doesn't. I mean, I understand that people are stupid and will do that, but it's true. You know what I mean? But I wouldn't do that, because doing in stores as well as doing gigs actually doubles your the possibility of selling your product, which is basically what you're after doing. I mean, with the best will in the world, selling your product isn't going to keep you in, it's not going to keep me in shoes. But at least if you can sell it without detriment to your gigs, because what you want ultimately is for people to come to gigs and buy merch at the table, you know. But in order to have that count towards the charts, it's got to come from a record shop, because where I sell it at my merch table, it doesn't count towards the charts. And I was actually having this conversation earlier. What difference does the charts actually make these days? I don't know.
Is it about them recouping their investment into an artist though as well?
What?
Is it a label?
The label.
Is it-
What in stores you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, they want to get a chart position, because that's what a label's about. It's about getting a chart position.
But some of it will be about recouping that initial outlay to record the record and the advance and
well,
other things.
yes, but the thing is...
And part of that you said is you'd have to be dumb at times to challenge that, but at times labels are saying, well, we've got a priority to recoup our investment, the same as a live one would. So is there not a dialogue that should be happening between the live agent and the manager and the labels that should actually consider that live plan alongside that, and does that really happen? I'm not saying you're in the position to do that, but that seems to be a strained process that hasn't happened, and it should be something maybe that we should be reworking.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I don't have a manager. I had a manager for 6 weeks in 1980. I've never had a manager since, so I've no idea. I mean, I know what that manager did, which is why we didn't have him after that. But I don't generally know. No, I'm serious. I don't really know what managers do, because I've never had one.
But if we forget the outstores for a second, if you run through the real economics of your tour that's happening right now, you played for us on Friday, right? You're not coming away making, and I know that, very much from that tour when you've got a full artist and the hotels and the travel, right? So what do you feel is needed for it to make it worthwhile in the long run for you to keep doing that?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, and it's a question I kind of asked myself after, you kind of come off tour and you're like, blimey, was that really worth it? I don't know. You see, the thing is, it's not, I barely make any money on tour. I don't really make money. I mean, the last time I did a tour, not the last one before that, I actually got Arts Council funding to cover it, because that's the only way I could afford to do it. So I had to have I had to get out Arts Council funding to cover what would have been a loss on tour. This time I won't make a loss, but I won't necessarily make a profit either. But in stores, I mean, because I don't have a manager, but I at least know that common sense says you don't try, you don't do an in-store down the road, because that'll cut into your gig. And what you want, if you're doing a gig, you want bodies in the room. How we make that work, I think I can only say the only way I see forward is by having a levy.
So you brought us on, and I want to move on to Tom, because I know Tom's got a lot to say all the time. But we had a conversation earlier, and I think it brought on about the risk to reward, right? Which you brought up about the last tour was funded by an Arts Council thing. So your risk was limited by that, right? At the same time, we're talking about promoters and new promoters whose risk to reward is now on the negative side.
Yeah.
You're talking about venues whose risk to reward is on the negative side.
Yeah.
You're talking about managers whose risk to reward is on the negative side. So essentially, is there really any ability to grow the pie to make that risk to reward, and what mechanisms can we do to get there? That is the essentially the question.
So my answer, mate, was we need a levy on gigs over 5k. We need if they're over 5k cap, we need a levy on those gigs like they do in France, and it needs to be walked down to grassroots music venues, grassroots artists and grassroots promoters. That's how we're going to make it work. I don't see any other way of that happening.
And Mark's not told you to pay you to say that, obviously.
No, Mark hasn't paid me to say it.
No,
Mark hasn't.
No, I know that. That's a logical thing.
Yeah, Mark's never given me any money.
What we need to also look at...
Me neither.
No, I think I'm genuine. I think that's the only way we're actually gonna fix it. Because when I go and do a gig in France, I'm in a nice dressing room with a mirror that I can see to do my makeup in, which is almost non-existent, I have to say, in any other bloody venue. It's like, all I can say to you guys is, if you wouldn't shave in it, how do you expect me to do my makeup in it? That's all I'm saying. But no, genuinely, we need that levy. And I sat in the DCMS Select Committee meetings in
Westminster.
Yeah, in Westminster, but I can't remember the name of the building. But anyway, I sat there, and that is genuinely the only way we're going to make it work. There's no other way of doing it. I don't see any other way of doing it, and I don't have a problem with that. And I know a lot of people would prefer it to be, they prefer it to be people's choice. But actually, I just think, no, fuck it. We need it. We need government to say, that's it, take their money and give it to other people who need it. That's my opinion.
Tom.
I've been involved in conversations about the pie for about 2 decades, and I would say beware that analogy, because the problem with the pie analogy is it leads you straight into this. It's a limited amount of money, and guess what? All of you bottom feeders need to fight for it amongst yourselves. Fight. If we're not getting it, you're getting it. I'm not getting it. He's getting it, and that's how we all get screwed.
Also to cut in there, the pie analogy is based on maximum earnings, right? Generally, when you look at it, this is what we could earn.
You will never know what total revenues are, so don't fool yourself. NDAs will make sure of that. So look, the truth is that lots of markets that don't function, what happens is companies get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and especially in our industry, where it was based on risk reward, high risk, high reward, the Wild West from the 1930s, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, people out there just trying to make money, trying to do this thing. These big global corporations now that sit on top owning so much of the market are trying to eliminate risk from everything they do. So who do they give the risk to? It's you, Nathan. You're the lucky winner. Right?
And everyone else
and
here.
all the artists and all the agents and all the promoters, you've won all of the risk because they don't want it. Because their business model, they need to grow by 10%, they're publicly floated, all of that, right? So the problem is when you've got a market that's not functioning, that's when governments have to step in. That's literally it. And of course nobody wants to hear that, especially none of these big companies do. But the truth is that when a market really when it can't heal itself, when the Ouroboros of international wealth just eats itself and kills the thing that feeds it, it has to be tempered, it has to be considered, it has to be looked
effectively what
at.
you're saying is, and as somebody that sits across boards and a live position and a recorded side, you're saying we're at a position of effective market failure.
It's clearly a market failure, isn't it? If you're saying, and I know this is true because I speak to people every day, that you can't make money from promoting a gig, you can't make money from owning a venue, you can't make money as a touring artist, you can't make money as a working commercial songwriter. Clearly, something's gone wrong, has it not? And we know that there's billions in this market, billions, right? So, I'm not being a communist here. I'm not being this isn't radical thinking. It's just quite clear. Any economist looking at our industry would go, yeah, that's not a functioning market.
So whose responsibility is that to make that work?
Well, we have to work together to speak to government. And this is the big discovery I've made in my campaigning, and I'm sure this would be agreed with the different, managers and artists groups that I work with, that holding a line together with government has been the strongest and clearest and boldest thing that we can do, because it will always be divide and rule otherwise. If you're just trying to protect you and yours, you're not going to win. Because in this system, it won't work. Because there needs to be a national strategy that looks at this and goes, wait a minute, our cities and places and towns and villages are going to lose these important places. They're also going to they're going to allow kids to just, obviously music has always been this, this machine of broken dreams, right? And everyone's fed off that. But every kid doesn't have to have a broken dream. Not every single one, right? And so it's like there has to be a cohesive look at this. And whether that's, and on the opposite side of that coin, my guess is we're going to have to give something back, right? And it's going to be venues getting far more into, if we're going to get government money and we're going to get levies and we're going to get regulation, it's going to be about, social prescribing, it's going to be about getting involved in mental health care, it's going to be about turning local venues into churches, basically. And then there's a really strong argument for that. And for me, I just want us to get on with it.
Is that something that you think others should be contributing to? And is that
they're going to have to, aren't they? They're going to have to.
And is that just major promoters, or will that be local authorities, combined authorities,
it's going to be
government,
everybody.
labels? Should we look at should the recorded sector have a responsibility to look into their talent development pipeline on the live side, because that does not happen currently? Should there be some synergy? And that's why I brought out the outstores. Andy.
Yeah, well, I completely agree with everything you just said, to be honest with you. I look at football and how, they've had the regulator sort of foisted on them in the end. But if you look at football and what that's been doing for grassroots, albeit it's been deemed not enough to the point where they've got a regulator pushed upon it, music's definitely at that point. And I think, it needs to be looking at everything, really. Not just for the live side. So for me, a levy is absolutely not enough. It should be happening. But I look at, schemes in places like Denmark where, venues are protected, and, the more regional they get, they've got try it stuff money so that they can nurture promoters coming through and give opportunities to new bands. They can take risks, try stuff. It's like none of us are in a position to be able to take risks the way things are.
From a manager's side, Tash, with some level of control, how do you see the the current state of play and the sustainability of it, and how we can grow it with bringing new artists, and where do you see your talent pipeline of new artists coming through, and how can that be negotiated?
I have no control. I just want to say that. I mean, it's hard for me because I'm an independent manager, so I don't have like a sum of money to fall back on, and I think that's the tricky thing. Like, in order to invest in a new artist now, you need to be able to front them to go on tour until it breaks money, and for it to break money, they need to be playing like 3,000 cap venues. I completely agree with everything that's been said, but my concern is that the time it's going to take for that to happen, it's going to be too late. So I think that there needs to become some kind of like band-aid measures put in place before that, and I think that is going to come from things being much more transparent. I think that there's like, when like recording has been referenced here, like I think it's good to recognise that the actual record label structure has changed a lot more now. Like now artists
When you said about transparent, did you mean live costings? Did you mean, what do you exactly mean by transparent in that sense?
I think it would...
From who?
I think from everyone. I think it would be really useful for managers to see venue budgets, and it would be useful for venues to see touring budgets, so that they can understand where the actual cost is going. Because I think they'll be like, oh, well, we're giving this artist $5,000 to play here, why isn't that enough? And then to be able to show, well, even to put on one gig is going to cost an artist $3,000, so there's no profit, like a minimal profit margin. But unless those conversations are being had, everyone just assumes everyone else is keeping the money, when really no one has the money. But I think that what I was saying about labels is that there's a lot more distribution deals being done now rather than traditional recording deals, which means that there's no tour support built in. And traditionally, a lot of artists survived going on longer tours because they had that tour support, and labels aren't investing that anymore because people aren't doing label deals in the same way. So I think that maybe labels need to be brought into the conversation as well, and not be seen as like that other.
That's kind of where I was getting in some ways to, because it seems like there is a definite divide in the whole overall music kind of makeup, and it's always been divided in two. And in the 80s and 90s, there were those traditional tour support budgets. Now, how do we get back to some accountancy of, and that's why I talked about the outstores, because of the kind of like they're recouping some, and how does it, we know that where that goes, but at what point does there become some kind of like dialogue between the two, and how can we bring, government can bring that into the discussions in select committees? I think, is there anything that could be negotiated within the deals that are happening, whether it be fees, hospitality, support, or anything else that could make it more robust in the short term till we get to something that we hope that is delivering that band-aid? Or is the typical mechanics and levers that we are calling for, which might be a reduced rate in VAT, reduction in business rates, is there other kind of mechanics that we need to look at overall?
There's other mechanics, absolutely. There's ways that you can look at the government to change how research and development works. So if we get them to reclassify research and development as developing an artist or developing a talent or something like that, then suddenly tax breaks start to become available in that development, and then you start to attract label money, right? Because that's money's going to find
so R&D into weapons, right? You get 120% break, right? So
exactly,
they're actually paying you to do R&D into weapons.
There's lots
but
of
in the arts, you're getting charged 20%.
100%.
So how do we collectively get on the same page with lobbying with everybody?
I mean, it's crazy what's happened in this country. You know, Nesta, the National Endowment for the Science and Technology and Arts, I think they're called, don't do any work on the arts. Nesta, it's in their name. There's an A on the end of it. Don't do it. Don't bother. Why would you bother? It's too confusing. Everyone's shouting at each other. You know, we're just so bad at this. It's like we just got to get our act together and hold tight and make the pitch. It's like for me, it's like it's really, really hard, especially hearing like managers how much we're struggling at the moment to actually get tours happening at all, and having musicians playing on the stage with the person who's singing, and it's not a backing tape, and all the rest of it. These costs are just crazy now. We're not in a situation where anybody can make any sense of it. And I had lunch with a young artist before I came here today, and she was like, she's obviously working 2 jobs, and she's got, on the one day she's got off, she's playing a show which she's not going to make any money off with 4 musicians, right? Because that's how she wants to do it, and she believes in it. But she also knows she's not going to make any money from it, which is really what the story is, where every time you hear it's the same story all the time. So we're going to have to do something. And for me, it's like, maybe it's very small solutions, maybe it's small things that we can get, but whatever we can get from government, whatever we can get from regulators, it's going to require a very clear, cohesive ask, right? Because governments can't hear all of this noise. They just, as soon as they hear all of the noise off all of the different stakeholders, they just switch off. They just run away. They're like, what are you lot about? You're lunatics, go away, right? Whereas, the guys with deep pockets just take them for a nice bottle of bolly and give them some free tickets.
So do you think there's a sense to lobby on a local and regional level to combined authorities and local authorities for the value of the arts that has been diminished, essentially, and change the culture alongside it that can lobby for that? Because on a mayoral level, they can have discretion over business rates, right?
Yeah.
So should we be collectively bargaining on those levels alongside the similar kind of levers, which is a levy or whatever you want to
I think you've answered your own question, because the answer is yes.
Yeah, but I mean, how can we do that? How can we generate together? That's what I think we need to do, because I don't think there is collective bargaining because of the things that Tash said, where there isn't the transparency that comes from that. So how do we generate that transparency in this current climate where nobody wants to share those costings? How can we be honest with each other?
But this is the dilemma, isn't it? It's like, if I win, you have to lose. This is the zero-sum pie game that we're all driven into that mode of thinking, and once we're in it, we can't get out of it. We have to just see past it, because the problem is the problem's happening whether you like it or not. I know, and the problem is it always feels mortally endangering to everything you're doing. It's mad. People are risking their lives, their houses, their mental health, their relationships to be involved. I mean, it's a risk-reward romance industry, isn't it? Right? And it's maddening, and this is why we can't get kids to become promoters, right? Because they're not in love with the idea of losing their houses, right? And it's but this is.
Would you see any priority? All right, here's a question: would you see any priority of things that are needed to be saved first over others? As in, it's harder and more costly to set up a venue where someone would pay, but it's easier to bring through an artist at some point because there's a larger pool of people, or it's easier to bring through a promoter in a few years' time that might take the risk. Is there any kind of like priority we need to put there, considering we sat here? No,
there's no priority. We need, and I'm not speaking as an MVT trustee here. I'm speaking as an artist and as a person. My feeling is there has to be a levy, because I don't think, if you get 100 people from this business in a room, they've all got a different opinion. So somebody has got to decide. And if it's got to be government, it's got to be government, right? So let them decide. What we then need are the different organisations that can then utilise that money. And so we have a pool of money for promoters, a pool of money for artists, a pool of money for venues. And that has to work. I mean, we may have to set up organisations that can already run that, but we do have those organisations already. But what is it you want, though? You don't want that?
I'm just saying, how do we get the message outside of the echo chamber? That's the truth. How do we penetrate the bubble that we sit in this room?
Well, we already have. Yeah, but we've already been to the DCMS. They have already agreed that it needs to change, and they have already said that if we don't get it together, then they will legislate. And the same person is still in charge of that select committee as was in charge before the election.
So do we need to hold them to account on the swiftness and the action that needs to be taken?
So what you mean is, do we need to go to DCMS and say, get it done?
Or is there alternative methods to do so?
I'm just thinking about the role of audience members in this, or people who do not work in the music industry, and how much they actually know about what's going on. I mean, the MVT is doing amazing work talking about it, and it's in the press, like, it seems every week now, but clearly it's not enough. I feel like there's still a disconnect where people just, they know we're struggling, they know music venues are closing, but maybe it's not really touching them yet, or they can still go to gigs, and so they don't...
Do you think an audience member understands what is in the makeup of a ticket?
No.
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 And do you think there needs to be more transparency in that?
Yeah. Yes, they need... I was going to say education, but it sounds a bit patronizing, but I think finding ways, and maybe it can come from venues and promoters. Maybe venues have, like, I'm just thinking about social media, for example, like maybe venues have the bigger platform there. Maybe we could use our social media to discuss this more in like a way that is not patronizing, but is clear and to the point. And I'm mentioning them because we're talking about holding DCMS to account, but maybe getting them on board with that. There's a lot of people, and they could help us pressurize DCMS together.
So what about if a ticket website had the breakdown when you saw the fee minus the VAT minus the PRS?
Just print it on the ticket. How much exactly that ticket you're holding, how much is going to which organisation?
Why hasn't that happened before?
I don't know. It's an interesting one, isn't it?
Would you like to see that, Tash?
I don't think that's going to be clear enough either, though, because
Every ticket after the 80% split obviously has a different... I'm just joking.
Is it 80% though at this level anymore?
But I think
everyone seems to be squeezed, right, Andy?
Yeah.
Sorry, you were talking.
I was going to say that I think, like, people, like, take Oasis, for example, but people be like, oh, this tickets cost this much, they're playing this many dates, this is how much money the artist is getting, they're raking it in, and people need to see how much touring costs, because the actual amount of money that goes for an artist at the end of a tour is so minimal. Like, the people that we're making the most amount of money are crew, like hotels probably, and like sometimes promoters.
And I want to ask something about what you might call the off the balance sheet costs of running a venue that never come into, and I think that these are the kind of the other discussions that need to be understood from an artist, a manager, an agent, which might be insurance, replenishment of a PA, a mirror, whatever else in the upkeep of a venue that never ever goes on a higher fee, that never ever goes to that. And that's the risk that a venue owner has to put in. And do those costs need to be reflected more into higher fees that necessarily aren't, that are squeezed by promoters and others? How do we get that transparency in the long term as well?
Maybe not in that much detail, but I guess, again, going back to better communication between us and transparency, but I don't think they need to know that the toilets at Earth keep, every weekend they're blocked, and that's costing us a lot of emergency money.
But for example, insurance, right, has gone up massively. So how is that reflected in a higher fee?
Well, I guess, sorry, I'm just thinking out loud, but we are going to increase the higher fees soon. And it is about how we communicate about that, how we justify it, how we show promoters and everyone that's going to be impacted by it that we're not, we're not doing it just to make more money, but it's a real need, and we can explain we have already drafted a nice letter, and it does that. I think also doing it every 7 years maybe is not the best way. Setting a time where people expect an increase and it's in line with what's going on in the world probably will also help with justifying it and people understanding why we're doing it without having to go into all the details of.
Do you think that promoters or others hiring it are open to that and open to the discussion of that? And do you think that that's something that is negotiated at times? And Andy, do you think that? Do you think that passing on the costs can you afford more?
No one can afford more. This is why it's like regulators absolutely needed, in my view. It's like, it's like if only people understood the touring costs, if only people understood the cost of running the venue and the fine margin a promoter might make if they're still willing to keep going as a promoter. We are at like a crisis point. And in terms of action points, I think, everyone does need to speak with one voice, whether it's MVT, with the MU, with the AIP, to be, putting that on the table. Because it is beyond just venues. It's, I don't want to say the pie, but it's the whole picture, isn't it? It's everything. Yeah, but no, I can't afford more.
Could I add one thing? I just wanted to bring one thing up that hasn't been discussed yet, and I think that a large part of the problem that we're in the situation that we're in is because of streaming. I think that streaming has tanked the music industry, and it means that labels have so much less money and artists have so much less money, which means that they're reliant on live in a way that they weren't before. So I think if streaming can be readdressed and it's, that those earnings are distributed more reasonably, that would solve a lot of the issues as well.
Completely agree with that, yeah.
Yeah.
And also, maybe make people, consumers of music, realize the real cost of things, because, you stream music and it seems almost free, even though you pay your monthly fee, and I guess psychologically that might have devalued music to them, and then that might make it less easy for them to justify the price of the ticket.
And certainly when you go into streaming, there's a whole other debate about who constructs the playlist and who's invested in the major companies and how that's made up. So, there's a whole other kind of argument there about the value of music and the value of the arts that comes in with it. But is there any other, one of the typical conversations about alternative economies and stuff like sponsorship and fundraising that has become strained, where typically in the arts, the Barclays Great Escape kind of conundrum that generated that seems to have had a knock-on effect that in music, a lot of sponsorship and corporate companies are now staying at arm's length away from it. So how can we have a thoughtful economy from that point but still bring in sustainability with economics, and as somebody that runs a festival and a venue and others, how do we manage that risk of either?
Well, honestly...
principles versus the reality,
I had Arts Council funding for one tour. They then changed the rules about what you have to do in order to get that funding. So I've never been able to get it again. So what we need is arts. I would much rather have Arts Council funding. I don't really want Barclays funding, because I remember when Barclays were investing in South Africa. So I would run screaming from Barclays. I don't really want. Given the choice, I don't want corporate sponsorship. I would rather that those corporations would tax.
But that's the reality right now.
I'm not going to get it though. I'm not going to get it. Who's going to sponsor me? I'm too gobby. Nobody's going to sponsor me, right? I'm not going to get that.
Flip it on its head again, and we look at, Music Venue Trust has done that with some of its initiatives that have happened. So it's had to do that. You know, some of the sponsors in today have had to do that. So we can't turn our back completely on it, because the reality is that we need that. So how do we balance that? Or
I'm not saying...
Or if we are up against it, how do we make it an attractive area for those to invest in to make sure that we can grow it again or make it sustainable.
I'm not saying we should turn our back on sponsorship. If people want to engage with the process, that's fine, but they have to engage with the process. I mean, it's always a two-edged sword, isn't it? It's like you have to see who's offering to sponsor you and see what they stand for and what they require of you and what you're not allowed to say. Because with sponsorship comes a responsibility to represent that company. So it's difficult. It can be a minefield, right? If companies, I mean, we have this thing called, corporate responsibility, corporate social responsibility. If corporate social responsibility included arts funding, that would be good. It tends not to, and companies choose to, I've been trying to get Tate and Lyle to fund the library where I used to live since it's called the Tate Central Library, and basically people like me and my ancestors made them their money in order that they can then endow something like this. But their idea of corporate social responsibility is not to fund a library, it's to fund kids going to school to learn maths. I mean, but look, corporate social responsibility exists, so we need to access those companies for them to bring their money to the arts, because they're not bringing it to the arts. It's going elsewhere, it's going to high art.
So we've got 5 minutes left, and if we were to kind of circle back around and we go the value, the risk to reward, essentially there should be several other people on this stage with us, whether it's a member of DCMS, whether it's a member of local authority, whether it's someone from a corporate background, whether it's an agent here as well. Yeah. If we were to go back through, and aside from the solutions and the sticking plasters, where do we find ourselves, as in who is going to get what, and how do we make ourselves get to the next stage of still being here in 5 years' time and bringing new talent through? Who wants to start?
That's a really big question. I will simply reiterate that, people whinging is not the solution. And it never was. And so it's like, I spent years fighting and still am fighting the streaming battle. And that's because, big corporations own the game and divide it up based on market share, right? And that's how it works. And you can't get past that unless somebody steps in and goes, wait, someone starts refereeing. Even in the Wild West, they had a sheriff in some towns. So we just have to sort of have a clear, positive message about what this is about. And it's about capturing the whole thing, the actual value of music, right? It's about capturing all of that.
Can I ask something, right? Because I think that one of the issues that we probably find as a grassroots is too disparate, and that we haven't essentially got our shit together essentially to get the real data, which is why it's important for everyone to put into stuff like the MVT survey so that we do have the data, because the first thing that's going to happen is that not DCMS, who don't make the things, the Treasury are going to ask, where is the data that's going to prove that we're going to grow the economy this? So do we have a responsibility collectively to get our shit together, to provide the clarity and the overall kind of picture of where we are? Is that one of the things that we need to do? We need to become more transparent overall. Is that something we have a responsibility as a sector to do that is normally very competitive?
Well, I mean, the main one I would say that one of the biggest asks the entire sector should be asking for is some kind of cultural creative observatory that looks and records the growth of arts and culture in this country at any given time. Because it's all well and good this, 5.3 billion or whatever the hell. People just quote these numbers out of, and it means nothing.
And things like the UK Music Survey aren't going to capture everything
of course
there,
not.
And don't get into the grassroots, right?
And they're not getting into all of the other things that we're talking about in terms of the way that music affects people's outcomes in life, whether or not, people end up being, everything from happier, mental health, recidivism, hand-eye coordination, all of this stuff that where you can actually measure outcomes using science, right? It would be incredible if we had something that looked at it consistently so that we could say, look, this is the social good that we are. Because we know we are. It's just, this is why governments after governments after governments see us as an add-on, as a nice to have, and the rest, right? We're not, it isn't the truth, you know what I mean? It's like social policy changes the world and then culture changes after that. Without the Education Act of the 1945 government, you do not get the Beatles. And without the Beatles, an awful lot of things don't happen. So and they need to understand that and grip it.
About the idea you just mentioned of an organization that measures all of that, it makes me think of, there is something called the Center for Cultural Value, but I think maybe part of the problem is that live music or what we do is not recognized as culture in this country. I'm from Belgium, so it's very different there. But I think, they could do that, but then maybe it needs, then that's where there needs to be investment to take that, to do that research, to invest in the evaluation of what we do, not just culture as a whole, which doesn't always include us.
But the thing is, there is research going on as to the benefits of music on, I think it's at King's College. So there is research going on. They do have some early findings. So there is data. There is data. I used to teach people who use mental health services. I used to help them write songs and perform. So I have seen that work for myself. We know it helps. Music helps produce endorphins. We also know that music is housed in the brain in the same place as maths and language. So my children were brought up speaking a second language, so therefore they also ended up being very good at maths, and they all play more instruments than I do. But the data is there. We don't need to go hunt for the data. We just need to access it and write it down, and somebody needs to collate it. I don't know who that somebody is.
Andy?
Well, not me. But I completely agree. I mean, like we benefit from Arts Council of Wales support and Welsh Government support, so we've been collecting a lot of data on the work we do, and we know that that's true of anyone who benefits from Arts Council support, right? So I'm sure those who maybe have never experienced grants or they've not accessed that world, it's something as a collective I'm sure we could do and quite quickly gather it, but it feels like very much a collaboration between the likes of UK Music, MVT, AOP, to me, Musicians Union, not to be forgotten about.
And Tash, anything to add?
I have the most stupid thing to add, and it feels really micro and now. I was thinking about things that I thought would help while preparing for the panel, and this feels a bit pointless to say now, but if small venues had backline, it would make such a huge difference to touring costs, because it means that artists could travel by public transport. It's such a tiny thing, but in terms of something that would have a really positive knock-on effect.
Hopefully, there might be an initiative from MVT at some point within that. I'm just alluding to something that may be happening. But the takeaways from that, and thank you for everyone's time, but the takeaways are probably that we need some kind of financial levy or mechanism to come in from the top to trickle down for the pipeline, a centre for cultural value to establish the value of music within the UK, and some kind of re-establishing of the value overall of where we are within lives. So thanks for where we are. Hope we didn't have too much deliberation, and thanks for your time for listening.